She arrived with a black eye and bruised ribs. The cowboy promised no one would hurt her again. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dusty, quiet town. The wind blew gently, stirring the dry earth and the loose scraps of paper that danced along the street. Most of the townspeople were inside, keeping cool from the fading heat, and only a few curious eyes peeked out from behind curtains and doorways. That was when she appeared. She moved slowly, carefully, as though every step caused her pain. Her clothes were torn in several places, and the faded fabric clung to her like it had witnessed the hardships she had endured. Her face carried the harsh marks of violence, a dark, swollen eye staring back at the world with a mix of defiance and fear. Her ribs ached with every breath, and she pressed one hand against her side instinctively, trying to ease the constant reminder of the blows she had suffered. She was alone, fragile, but there was something about the way she held herself that drew attention. She didn't stumble blindly. She walked with a cautious determination, like someone who had learned to survive by keeping her senses alert and her guard up. From the porch of the general store, a few townsfolk watched quietly. Whispers spread softly, carried by the wind. "Who is she?" one asked. "She looks like she's been through hell," said another. Most of them didn't dare approach. Their lives were simple and small, and trouble had a way of passing them by. But there was one man who did not turn away. He was a cowboy, tall and lean, with a weathered hat pulled low over his brow. His eyes were sharp, but they held a gentleness that only came from a lifetime of seeing people hurt and learning when to step in. He noticed her instantly, the way she hesitated before each step, how she flinched when a piece of broken wood creaked under her foot. He felt a tug in his chest, a need to help, to offer safety to someone clearly in danger. Without a word, he walked toward her, his boots crunching over the dry dirt. When he reached her, he stopped at a respectful distance. She turned to him, wariness etched into every line of her face. She didn't trust easily. No doubt her past had taught her that people often caused more pain than they healed. The cowboy didn't rush her. Instead, he spoke softly, in a voice that carried calm and steadiness. "You need help," he said simply. He held out a water bottle and gestured to a nearby bench, inviting her to sit. She shook her head faintly, unwilling to accept kindness from a stranger, yet her body was betraying her. Each step was slower, more hesitant, as if she feared collapsing entirely. Her ribs throbbed, her energy waned, and finally, after a moment of hesitation that seemed to stretch forever, she allowed him to guide her toward the bench. Not a word was exchanged as he moved beside her, his presence reassuring. It was a silent understanding. He wouldn't ask her to speak before she was ready, but he would protect her while she regained her strength. When she finally sat down, she bowed her head, hiding the worst of her bruises from the world. The cowboy sat nearby, giving her space, but close enough that she could feel he would not abandon her. After a while, he offered a clean cloth and some cool water. Slowly, carefully, she took it. Her hands were shaking, but she drank. It was a small moment, but for someone who had been hurt and alone for so long, even the simplest acts of care felt monumental. The townsfolk watched from a distance, unsure what to make of the situation. Some wanted to intervene, to ask questions, to offer help, but they hesitated. The cowboy didn't need them. He was enough for her, at least for now. And that was all that mattered. He didn't demand her story. He didn't pry or pressure. Instead, he waited patiently, knowing that trust could not be rushed, that it could only grow slowly, like a plant reaching for sunlight through the cracks in the earth. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, the cowboy led her to an old barn on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a sturdy structure with hay stacked neatly in one corner and a few blankets spread out on the floor. But to her, it felt like a palace. It was a place where she could finally rest without fear. He helped her sit on the blankets, and she allowed herself to lean back for the first time in days, letting the pain wash over her in waves. Her body was sore, her ribs bruised, her eyes swollen. But here, for a moment, she could breathe without fear. The cowboy left her for a while, stepping outside to tend to a small fire he had prepared. He didn't hub her or make her feel watched. Instead, he gave her space, knowing that respect was as important as protection. She closed her eyes, listening to the sounds around her. The soft rustle of the wind through the barn, the faint creak of the wood, the distant barking of a dog. It was peaceful, and it was unfamiliar. For so long, danger had been her constant companion, but now, for the first time, she felt a glimmer of safety. Hours passed, and the sky darkened. Stars began to twinkle overhead, small points of light in the vast endless night. The cowboy returned quietly, bringing her some food. He placed it on a small wooden crate and stepped back, allowing her to eat in privacy. She hesitated at first, then slowly began to eat, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't used to being cared for. Every bite was a reminder that someone was looking out for her, that she wasn't alone. As the night deepened, the cowboy finally spoke again. "You're safe here," he said simply. "No one will hurt you." His words were quiet, but they carried a weight that seemed to settle over her like a warm blanket. She wanted to believe him, but trust didn't come easily. Yet something in his tone, the calm certainty in his eyes, made her hope that maybe, just maybe, she could finally rest without fear. The night passed slowly, but for the first time in weeks, she slept without trembling. The barn, with its simple walls and the cowboy's quiet presence, became her refuge. She dreamed not of fear or pain, but of walking in open fields under a bright sun, of feeling free without looking over her shoulder. It was a small dream, but it felt like the first step toward a new life. Morning arrived, soft and golden, and with it came the realization that she had survived the night, that she had someone willing to protect her, and that perhaps there was hope beyond the pain she had endured. The cowboy was already awake, tending to the small fire, and he offered her a gentle nod. No questions, no pressure, just presence. And in that quiet, steady companionship, she felt a spark of trust begin to grow. For now, she didn't have answers. She didn't need to speak of the horrors she had endured. All that mattered was that she had arrived here, to this place, to this man who had promised that no one would hurt her again. And that promise, though simple, was powerful. It was a beginning, a fragile start of healing in a world that had shown her so much pain. She stayed in the barn that day, tending to her bruises, resting her ribs, and letting her mind slowly relax for the first time in weeks. Outside, the town went about its usual routines, unaware that in their midst someone had found a small, quiet sanctuary. By evening, she could stand without wincing, walk without fear, and even smile faintly at the gentle humor in the cowboy's words. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills again, she realized she was no longer the frightened, broken woman who had stumbled into town. She was still hurt, yes, and her body carried the marks of her suffering, but she was alive, and alive in a place where someone cared. That care was not just protection. It was a promise that the days ahead could be different, that she could learn to trust again, that she could rebuild a life free from fear. And so, as the stars began to shine above the quiet barn, she lay down on the blankets, letting sleep come naturally, without dread. Outside, the cowboy kept watch silently, ensuring that no harm would reach her. And for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The morning sun filtered through the cracks in the old barn, casting soft streaks of light across the hay-strewn floor. She stirred slowly, blinking against the brightness, and for a brief moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memories crept back, the bruises, the pain, the fear that had followed her for so long. But the barn felt different from anywhere she had ever been. It smelled faintly of hay and wood, warm and clean, and it held a quiet stillness that soothed her nerves. The cowboy was already awake, moving quietly in the shadows of the barn. He had prepared a small breakfast, bread, fresh fruit, and a little water. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had eaten in days. She hesitated before taking it, her hands trembling, but he gave her a calm, reassuring smile. "Eat," he said simply. "You need your strength." She sat down slowly, careful not to jolt her ribs. She broke the bread into small pieces, taking tiny bites, and sipped the water cautiously. The cowboy watched without interrupting, allowing her space to eat at her own pace. There was no rush, no demand for words, just a quiet presence that felt safe in a way she hadn't felt in months. Once she had eaten, she leaned back against the hay bales, closing her eyes for a moment. The pain in her ribs throbbed gently, and her eyes, still swollen, ached when she moved. But beneath the physical pain was something heavier. The weight of mistrust, the fear that the world itself could hurt her at any moment. She had learned early on that people were not always kind, that promises could be broken, and that trusting someone could leave her more vulnerable than before. The cowboy knelt nearby, speaking softly. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share. But when you're ready, I'm here to listen." His voice was calm, steady, and it carried a warmth that seemed to wrap around her like a protective blanket. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that someone could truly be there for her without expecting anything in return. It took hours for her to speak, and even then her words were careful and measured. She told fragments of her story, how she had trusted someone who was supposed to care for her only to be betrayed and hurt in ways she could barely put into words. She spoke of running, hiding, and the endless nights spent trying to escape the shadows of fear. The cowboy listened without interruption, nodding slightly, never judging, never asking questions that felt too intrusive. "I thought I would never be safe again," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think anyone could help me." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move to wipe them away. The cowboy reached out slowly, placing a hand on hers, careful not to startle her. "You are safe now," he said. "No one will hurt you again. That's my promise." His words were simple, but they carried a weight she hadn't felt in a long time. For years she had lived with uncertainty, fear, and the constant need to protect herself. Hearing someone say that aloud, with no hidden meaning, no expectation, it was almost foreign. Slowly, she allowed herself to relax, letting the tension in her shoulders ease for the first time in months. The rest of the morning passed quietly. She explored the barn, inspecting the small space and noting how carefully the cowboy had arranged it. There were extra blankets, a stack of hay for comfort, and a few clean clothes neatly folded. He had thought of everything, not just keeping her safe, but making her feel cared for. It was a small gesture, but in her world it meant more than words could say. By midday, she was able to move around more freely. Her ribs still hurt, but the pain was manageable. She began helping the cowboy with small chores, stacking hay, cleaning the barn floor, and tending to a small garden he had started behind the barn. It wasn't hard work, but it gave her purpose. For the first time in weeks, she felt useful, capable, and alive in a way that wasn't defined by fear or pain. The cowboy noticed the subtle changes in her behavior. She laughed quietly when she made a mistake with a hay, and she smiled faintly when he joked about her clumsiness. These small moments of lightness were precious, fragile, but they signaled something important, that healing could begin even in the midst of past pain. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, she paused and looked at him seriously. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Her voice was hesitant, as if she feared the answer might shatter the fragile trust forming between them. The cowboy didn't flinch. He wiped his hands on his pants and said simply, "Because no one should have to face the world hurt and alone. And because I believe you deserve better." She considered his words carefully. They were honest, without any hidden meaning. She wanted to argue, to say that people didn't care, that promises were meaningless, but deep down, she felt the truth in them. For the first time, someone had offered help without expecting anything in return. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the need to run. As days passed, she began to regain more of her strength. The black eye faded into a dark bruise, and her ribs, while still tender, were no longer excruciating. She could walk longer distances without wincing, lift heavier objects without fear, and even laugh more freely. The cowboy's presence remained steady, always nearby but never controlling, never demanding. He had taught her the value of patience, respect, and quiet strength. Slowly, She started opening up more about her past. She told him about the places she had lived, the people she had trusted, and the moments when fear had controlled her every action. Each story was heavy with pain, but sharing it lightened her burden slightly. The cowboy listened, validating her feelings without judgment, reminding her that her experiences did not define her worth. One evening, as the sun set in vibrant shades of pink and gold, she sat on a blanket outside the barn, gazing at the distant hills. "I don't know if I can ever go back to the way things were," she admitted. "I don't know if I can trust anyone again." The cowboy sat beside her, offering a reassuring hand. "You don't have to rush," he said. "Trust is something you build slowly, and I'll be here every step of the way." That night, as she lay on the blankets inside the barn, she reflected on the changes she had felt. She had arrived fragile, scared, and uncertain. But now, under the quiet protection of someone who cared, she felt a spark of hope. She was still healing, still fragile in some ways, but she was no longer alone. For the first time, she believed that she could face the world without fear, that safety was not just a dream, and that her life could be more than a series of painful memories. In the following days, the pattern continued. She worked alongside the cowboy, helped with chores, and gradually became more independent. Yet, she always knew she could rely on him, and that knowledge gave her courage. She began to plan small walks outside the barn, exploring the town slowly, cautiously, testing the waters of freedom she had long denied herself. During these walks, the townsfolk began to notice her presence. At first, they were wary, unsure if she would retreat at the first sign of trouble. But as they watched her grow stronger, calmer, and more confident, they began to respect her resilience. Children waved from a distance, storekeepers nodded with quiet approval, and she realized that the world wasn't entirely hostile. There were people who could be kind, and she was learning how to trust them again. One afternoon, she and the cowboy sat by the small garden, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to help me." The cowboy shook his head, his eyes kind. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because you deserved safety and care, and no one should have taken that from you." She looked at him thoughtfully, feeling the truth in his words. No one had ever helped her without expecting something in return. And now, here was someone who didn't just protect her physically, but also helped her heal emotionally. That kind of care was rare, precious, and life-changing. By the end of the second week, she had begun to smile more openly. She laughed at small jokes, shared stories of her childhood, and even began teaching the cowboy a few simple skills she had learned from her travels. They worked together, ate together, and slowly, a bond formed, not of dependence, but of mutual respect and trust. She realized that she didn't need to face the world alone anymore. There was someone who would stand beside her, who would ensure that the promise of safety was real. The barn, once a simple shelter, had become a place of healing, growth, and hope. And she knew deep down that her life was starting to change. The fear that had governed her existence was slowly fading, replaced by the courage to imagine a future that wasn't defined by pain. She had survived the worst, and now she had a chance to live again, fully, freely, and without fear. By the third week, she had begun to feel stronger than she had in months. Her bruises had faded. Her ribs no longer throbbed with every movement, and her black eye was just a faint memory. Each day as she moved through the barn and the small garden outside, she noticed small victories, walking longer distances without wincing, carrying heavier bundles of hay, and even laughing more freely with the cowboy. The quiet strength she had been discovering within herself began to grow, and with it came a realization. Healing wasn't just about being safe. It was about reclaiming the courage that had been stolen from her. The cowboy watched her progress with quiet pride. He never rushed her, never pushed her too far too fast. Instead, he offered gentle encouragement, small challenges that allowed her to test her limits without fear. One morning, he handed her a basket of freshly picked vegetables from the garden. "Let's go into town," he suggested. "Just a short walk. You can see the world outside these walls." Her stomach tightened at the thought. The streets of the town were familiar, but they were also reminders of the world that had hurt her. People would stare, whisper, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face that yet. But the cowboy's presence gave her courage. His hand brushed lightly against hers, a silent reassurance. "I'll be right here," he said. "No one will touch you. No one will hurt you." Step by step, she followed him through the quiet streets. At first, she kept her head down, eyes fixed on the ground, listening to the sound of her own footsteps. But as they moved further, she noticed the townspeople watching, and something shifted inside her. They weren't hostile, they were curious, cautious, and some even offered small smiles. It was the first time she had realized that not everyone in the world was dangerous. That simple observation filled her with a mix of relief and disbelief. In the weeks that followed, the walks became longer. She explored the outskirts of the town, learning which streets were quieter, which shops offered friendly greetings, and which corners of the town felt safe to rest in the sun. Every step was a test, a small victory over the fear that had long controlled her. And each time she returned to the barn, she felt a little stronger, a little more capable of trusting the world again. One afternoon, as they walked near a field beyond the town, she stopped abruptly.
"I need to face him," she said, her voice trembling but firm.
She didn't need to explain fully. The cowboy understood. He nodded quietly, guiding her to a shaded spot beneath a large oak tree. "You will face him safely," he promised, "and you won't do it alone." The cowboy helped her prepare, mentally. He reminded her that she was no longer the frightened person who had stumbled into town weeks ago. She was stronger, more aware, and capable of standing up for herself. He didn't tell her exactly what to do. She needed to find that strength inside herself. But he offered strategies, support, and a calm presence that reminded her she was never alone. Together they made a plan. It wasn't about revenge or anger. It was about reclaiming her life. The people who had hurt her needed to know that she would no longer be afraid, that she had regained control, and that she could protect herself. The cowboy emphasized that courage didn't mean rushing into danger blindly. It meant being prepared, aware and confident in her own strength. The day finally arrived. She followed the cowboy's instructions carefully, keeping her head high and her steps steady. Her heart raced, and memories of past fear tried to cloud her mind. But she focused on the here and now, on the safety of the cowboy's presence and the knowledge that she had grown stronger over the past weeks. When she confronted the people who had hurt her, it was nothing like the encounters she had feared. She didn't yell, she didn't lash out, but she spoke firmly and clearly, recounting the past calmly and confidently. Her voice did not shake, her gaze did not waver, and the weight of fear that had once bound her seemed to lift with every word. The cowboy stood silently nearby, a reassuring presence, but she realized she didn't need him to speak for her. She was finding her own voice, strong and unwavering. Afterward, she returned to the barn with the cowboy. She felt lighter, freer, and more confident than she had in years. The experience was not easy. It had dredged up old fears and memories. But it was necessary. She had faced the shadows of her past and walked away stronger. The cowboy smiled gently, acknowledging the courage she had displayed without overshadowing her own achievement. In the following days, she took more steps toward independence. She began managing small chores around the barn on her own, tending to the garden, and even learning to repair small tools. Each task, though simple, was a reminder of her capabilities, a demonstration of the strength she had rebuilt within herself. The physical work also helped her heal emotionally, giving her a sense of accomplishment and control that had been missing for so long. During one quiet evening, she sat outside the barn and watched the sun dip behind the distant hills. "I didn't think I could ever feel this strong again," she admitted to the cowboy. "I didn't think I could face what happened without being afraid." He nodded, understanding fully. "Fear is natural," he said softly, "but courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. You've learned that, and you've proven it to yourself." Over time, she also began to reconnect with the town in small ways. She visited the local store, helped in small community tasks, and slowly built relationships with the people around her. Some were hesitant at first, unsure of how to approach someone who had suffered so much. But as they saw her confidence grow, her ability to stand tall, and her determination to reclaim her life, they began to treat her with respect and kindness. She realized that the world was not just a place of pain, but a place where she could belong, where she could be valued for who she was, not defined by what she had endured. She also began to share small parts of her story with those she trusted, not to seek pity, but to help others understand the strength it takes to survive. Children in the town began to listen with wide eyes as she spoke about courage and resilience. Adults nodded quietly, some with tears in their eyes, recognizing the hard paths she had traveled. And in those moments, she felt a sense of purpose. Her past suffering, though painful, could be transformed into lessons of strength for others. The cowboy remained by her side through it all, not as a guardian, but as a partner, a guide, and a friend. He never sought to overshadow her victories, but he celebrated them quietly, knowing that she needed to feel her own strength. Their bond deepened, founded on trust, respect, and shared experiences. He had promised to keep her safe, but what he had given her went beyond protection. He had given her a space to rebuild her life and rediscover her courage. By the end of the third week, she felt almost unrecognizable to the person who had stumbled into town with bruises, fear, and pain. She was stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own capabilities. The shadows of her past still lingered at times, but they no longer controlled her. She had faced them, stood tall, and emerged stronger on the other side. One evening, as they sat together in the barn watching the stars emerge in the sky, she reflected on her journey.
"I never thought I could face him without trembling," she said softly.
"But I did, and I feel stronger." The cowboy smiled gently, placing a hand on hers. "That strength was always inside you," he said. "I just helped you see it." For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to dream about the future. A future where she could live without constant fear, where she could trust others again, and where she could continue to grow, heal, and thrive. She realized that her past had shaped her, but it didn't define her. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, a woman reclaiming her life one step at a time. The barn, once a simple shelter, had become a sanctuary. The garden she tended flourished under her care, a reflection of the new life she was cultivating within herself. The town, which had once seemed like a place of uncertainty, now felt like a community where she could belong. And the cowboy who had quietly offered protection and guidance had become a steady presence in her life, reminding her that strength, courage, and hope were always within reach. As the night deepened, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had faced her past, reclaimed her voice, and discovered a courage she thought was lost forever. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that life could be full of hope, growth, and possibility. The morning air was crisp and calm as she stepped outside the barn, stretching her arms and feeling the sunlight warm her face. She took a deep breath and noticed how much she had changed over the past few weeks. The fear that had once weighed heavily on her chest now felt lighter, almost as if it had been replaced by a quiet strength. Every step she took seemed freer, more confident, and she realized that she no longer flinched at small sounds or sudden movements. For the first time in a long time, she felt fully alive. The cowboy stood nearby, watching her with a gentle smile. He didn't say anything at first, just observed, as though giving her space to enjoy the simple pleasure of being herself. "You're ready for today?" he said softly after a moment. "You've worked hard, healed, and grown. And now it's time to think about what comes next." She nodded, understanding what he meant. The barn had been a refuge, a place of healing and quiet growth. But she knew her life could no longer be confined to its walls. There were people to meet, a town to explore, and a future to build. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness, but this time it was different. She knew she could face the world with courage and strength. Together they walked toward the small town center. Her steps were steady, and she held her head high. As they passed the general store and the bakery, townspeople greeted her with friendly smiles. Some waved, others nodded in quiet respect. She felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced before. The town that had once seemed intimidating now felt like a place where she could grow, make connections, and even find joy again. Over the next few days, she began taking on small responsibilities. She helped the store owner organize shelves, tended to the garden outside the barn, and even assisted in caring for some of the animals nearby. Each task was a reminder of her capabilities, and she felt pride in her accomplishments. The cowboy watched her progress, never overshadowing her, allowing her independence to flourish. He offered guidance when necessary, but he let her make decisions on her own, reinforcing the confidence she had slowly built. One afternoon, she decided to visit the town library. It was quiet, filled with the soft rustling of pages and the faint smell of old books. She wandered through the aisles, touching the spines gently, feeling the texture of knowledge in her hands. Reading had always been a comfort to her, a way to escape the harshness of reality, and now it felt like a bridge to a brighter future. She selected a few books about self-growth, courage, and stories of survival. Sitting by a sunlit window, she began to read, her mind absorbing lessons she could apply to her own life. As the days turned into weeks, she also began forming small friendships in the town. A young woman at the bakery shared stories of her own struggles, and the two found comfort in their shared experiences. Children she met in the town square asked questions about the garden, the animals, and the barn, and she found herself enjoying their innocent curiosity. Each interaction, small though it might seem, helped her rebuild trust in others and reminded her that kindness and friendship still existed in the world. Despite the progress, she still took moments for reflection. Each evening she sat quietly in the barn, thinking about how far she had come. She remembered the nights of fear, the constant ache of her bruises, and the uncertainty that had consumed her. And she realized that she had survived all of it, emerging stronger, braver, and more resilient. The memories no longer held power over her. They were lessons, reminders of her strength and perseverance. One day, as they worked together in the garden, she turned to the cowboy. "I never imagined I could feel this happy again," she said, her voice filled with genuine emotion. "I was so afraid that the world would always hurt me. But now I feel like I can handle anything." He nodded, smiling warmly. "You've done the hard work," he said. "You've faced your fears, found your courage, and reclaimed your life. I only helped you see what was already inside you." As the seasons began to change, she embraced new challenges. She helped organize a small community gathering, teaching children about the garden and animals, and sharing stories of courage in a way that inspired them. She even began to repair parts of the barn, learning new skills that gave her confidence and independence. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, felt like a triumph over the fears that had once held her captive. She also began thinking about her long-term future. The thought of leaving the barn one day, moving forward with her life, no longer terrified her. Instead, it filled her with hope. She dreamed of traveling, learning new skills, and building a life filled with meaningful relationships and purpose. The past would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She was free to write her own future. The cowboy remained her constant companion, not as a savior, but as a supportive presence. They worked together, laughed together, and shared quiet moments of reflection. He never pressured her, never demanded gratitude, only offered guidance and reassurance. And in return, she trusted him completely, not out of dependence, but out of respect and appreciation for the role he had played in her healing journey. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting golden light across the barn and garden, she stood at the edge of the field and breathed deeply. She felt the warmth of the sun, the gentle breeze on her face, and the steady heartbeat of life around her. For the first time in years, she felt complete peace. The barn had been her sanctuary, the cowboy had been her guide, and now she could move forward fully, embracing the world without fear. The town had also become part of her life in meaningful ways. Neighbors offered small gestures of kindness, a fresh loaf of bread, an invitation to join in community meals, or a simple wave in passing. She realized that while the world had hurt her in the past, it also held moments of beauty, connection, and generosity. She felt gratitude not only for the safety she had been given, but for the opportunity to grow, contribute, and belong. As weeks turned into months, she continued to build her life. She expanded the garden, helping it flourish under her care, and taught local children how to tend to plants and animals. She learned new skills from the townspeople, from cooking to repairing small tools, and each day brought a sense of accomplishment and self-reliance. She had transformed from someone defined by fear and injury to someone defined by resilience, courage, and hope. One crisp morning, she stood at the edge of the town looking toward the horizon. Memories of her painful past came briefly, but they no longer controlled her thoughts. She smiled, realizing that the strength she had discovered within herself was permanent. She was no longer bound by fear or doubt. She was free to choose her own path, to create a life filled with hope, purpose, and joy. The cowboy joined her silently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're ready," he said softly. "Whatever comes next, you can face it." She nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and calm. She had faced her darkest moments, reclaimed her voice, and discovered courage she thought was lost. And now, she could step fully into the life she had worked so hard to rebuild. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, she returned to the barn one last time for reflection. She walked through the space, touching the hay bales, brushing her hands over the blankets, and recalling the first day she had arrived, bruised, broken, and scared. She realized how far she had come. The barn had been a place of healing, and now it symbolized her journey. From fear to courage, from pain to hope, from survival to life. She looked up at the night sky, stars twinkling like tiny reminders of possibility. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream without hesitation. A life of safety, happiness, and purpose stretched out before her. She felt gratitude for the cowboy who had kept his promise, for the town that had accepted her, and most importantly, for her own courage and resilience. She had endured, healed, and grown, and she knew that her life would never again be limited by fear. From that moment on, she embraced each day fully. She continued to nurture the garden, teach the children, build friendships, and explore opportunities beyond the barn. She moved forward with confidence, carrying the lessons of her past but not letting them define her. Every step was a choice to live fully, to trust again, and to embrace the possibilities of the future. And so, in a quiet barn at the edge of a small town, a woman who had once arrived broken, frightened, and alone now stood tall, strong, and hopeful. The cowboy kept his silent watch, knowing that his role had been important but temporary. She had discovered her own strength, reclaimed her life, and embraced a future full of promise. The past was a memory, the present a journey of healing, and the future a horizon of endless possibilities. She had arrived with a black eye and bruised ribs, but she left with courage, resilience, and hope, a testament to the power of compassion, trust, and the human spirit.